We are back with more college football coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering a couple of bowl games in bowl season 2 to get straight into it and starting out with action that I watched on Saturday with the Boy Mowers Pinstripe Bowl between Penn State and Clemson in Yankee Stadium on a rather cold day. Just crazy to think about, man. Haven't the Yankees been through enough between getting both raced by the fucking Blue Jays in the ALDS in the first place? Now you have to host a couple of teams who honestly have underwhelmed by their fan base's expectations. And I mean, at this point, we already understand that the Terry Smith, the interim for Penn State, is probably going to be moved on from, as they recently hired Matt Campbell. So this was more than likely going to be his final game leading the team out there, and he definitely wanted to put it all on display. But largely for this season, Penn State, it had been a shit show, to say the least. Now, they had won like 3 of their last 4 games, I believe, coming into this, so that's a great turnaround for them. But still, they would love to be in a much better place after literally playing in the CFP semifinal game last year. Then you have Clemson on the other side, and man, same thing, kinda. I mean, Dabo Swinney's still there. Granted, he's accomplished far more than James Franklin had to that point, so he's going to retain his job. But you have to get the feeling, if you're a Clemson fan, that between all the stuff that Swinney has said over the course of the season, in between his inability to even worry about adjusting to the NIL era of college football until he absolutely had no other choice, I don't know how much longer he'd be a part of that program, to be honest with you. Now, you're not screaming fire him like you'd be delusional to do so, but I don't know. This game, to be in this spot for Dabo Swinney compared to, years of just competing for national championship spots and making deep playoff runs, regardless of the format of a postseason, to be stuck in this situation has got to be rather revealing for the state of this team right now. But nonetheless, it made for an intriguing matchup, to say the least, between just some very, I guess, mixed up rosters here. I mean, that's the beauty you get with bowl games, is that you're going to have some guys in there who are returning, who are potentially playing for their final time in college, but you also give a chance to some of the other players who rarely get to step on the field at all to go out there and get some reps in, see what you got for the upcoming season. That is why it's an exhibition at the end of the day. But to start it out, I got in at pretty much the beginning of the second quarter, and I don't know, neither team was really able to move the ball all that well down the field in the earliest portion of it. And while Clemson themselves would get a great stop here, they kept one of the other Penn State running backs just short of the line to gain. And then you had Bachmeier try to get a throw off that ended up just, being very anticlimactic. Like, Rappel caught the ball. It's just that the field was so fucking slick, and that'll be a theme for this game. He slipped and fell on his own volition. Nobody else even touched him by that point. He just straight up slipped and fell. And since you can't advance in that fashion once you go down that way, well, that was the end of the play right there. Weird start to the watch. But it would get even worse for K. Klubnik. One thing that hurt Clemson throughout the game is that they themselves were never able to really run the football, get control of the sticks in that fashion. They did find some success in other ways, but whenever you have that happen, you're going to be susceptible to a boatload of pressure. And Kate Klubnik under pressure. Yikes. So when Dennis Sutton managed to get him for a sack here, you knew that was going to happen sooner rather than later. It was Dennis Sutton's last game as a Nittany Lion, and it makes sense. He's one of the better edge rushers in the nation, so I could imagine he's probably going to be a prospect that's heavily considered entering the draft. But, bruh, that was just not going to go well if you consistently got yourself in that situation. Clemson's defense for the longest time was holding, regardless, though. In Penn State, that's the thing that they ended up struggling with as well on their front. Now, granted, they were going to have a little more success in terms of running the football throughout the rest of the game, but early on, man, they couldn't get anything to go, really. And outside of Trevor Pena, none of the other wide receivers, the true wide receivers on that team, were really all that consistent, and they were missing some guys. Even when Kyron Hudson was playing, did you really feel his impact? I don't know if you can say so. Ross is more of a speed guy, but even then, he had multiple situations. He and Bachmeier, bruh, where exactly is the chemistry at? I'm not sure. It's bowl season. You've been paired up for all this damn time, and you don't have an idea of what exactly the play is and how to run it, or how exactly to get it over to Ross in that situation. It's just weird dynamic there. Pena's been that most reliable one out of the three. And he'd get it done there, but it still wouldn't be enough, and they'd have to punt the football. Fortunes turned a little bit for the Tigers as they were able to get a great run to start off the drive, and then extended it with the contributions of TJ Moore Jr., a freshman wide receiver for Clemson, getting himself down the field for a massive 44-yard gain, and ultimately getting them in field goal range. But of course, on a day where it's that cold and that windy, even a chip shot field goal is not going to be really easy. Still, to miss from a 33-yard range is fucking wild. Completely. It was like it should have been money, and it just stayed the course, which was terrible considering the placement of the ball on the hash. It was like, you can't have that, man. You just cannot. More of the same would go on for both defenses here, as, again, Bachmeier, outside of Pena, could not find contributions elsewhere in that core, and even with the backup tight end. But ultimately, Clemson would respond off of that, including more TJ Moore contributions, and also taking advantage of the legs that Cade Klubnik can have at times to work their way down the field. And although one of the Penn State edge rushers would get a hold of Cade Klubnik again, they'd be able to work themselves back into field goal range and have their guy kick a 48-yarder. Make that cleanly. Could have been good for much further, even with the conditions. So again, how the hell do you miss a 33-yarder in that situation? I don't know. Penn State themselves, before the half ended off, would also manage to work down the field and get themselves a field goal, with Ryan Barker getting a near career high in terms of, career long in terms of distance for himself on this kick to at least give Penn State the 6-3 lead heading into the third quarter, where we just got even more chaos. But Penn State started to make a little bit of a stride, admittedly. Martin Jr. is a true freshman running back for them, and he had to play because Singleton and Katron Allen, possibly one of the best running back duos in the nation to this point, they were not playing. More than likely, they're going to enter the NFL draft pool. We're probably going to hear about that some point soon, to be honest. And it's well-deserved. They've played there for long enough, you know what I'm saying? They've given it all that they can with this damn team. And they've still come up short collectively, but have accomplished a lot as a pairing. So their legacy there is set. There's no need to try to drag it out for so long, because if you do it, then again, you miss your opportunity, potentially. It's always a weird situation to be in there. Like, yeah, maybe you're thinking about one more year of potentially being in that program. But again, it could, in some cases, take away. Especially when you consider that Singleton, I would say, already feels like he's a solidified product. What more does he really need to prove as a player to NFL scouts in teams that would say, you know what, okay, I'm going to stay back for another year? He is already primed for the NFL in some kind of role that could still be determined. Yes, but there's no need at that point. If you're already NFL ready, to use that term, then it's like, bro, you're set. Why stay back and hinder yourself of potential development in the big leagues? Doesn't make any sense. Luke Reynolds as well, even though this drive would not end in the best way for the Nittany Lions, even with them getting into Clemson territory, Reynolds, their tight end, who was a backup to Tyler Warren, is, ironically enough, in these situations, being utilized like he was. Getting all of the good looks you could ask for from a tight end, and then also lining up all over the field. He's definitely been more of a versatile guy for them, and maybe that's just something that Penn State's been looking for. Like, they've literally been playing him the exact same way in this game that they were with Tyler Warren when he was there. And, you know, we talk a lot about the Iowa tight ends here, but Penn State might be starting to figure out that thing themselves. I'm not going to lie to you. So I would watch out for him as a player in the coming years. That could be interesting. Clemson themselves still didn't have a response in them because, for whatever reason, one, I didn't even think Adam Randall, the running back for Clemson, was going to be playing in this game. He, as a runner, even though he has the frame to be built like a wide receiver out of the backfield, and that has helped at times, man, he could not get ahead of the sticks, although he was able to pick up the first down. But they were still just getting themselves in these weird scenarios. And once they got in a spot where they had a false start penalty on a crucial third and already long at that point, ended up proving too insurmountable for them to overcome. They had no choice but to punt there. Penn State started to control the clock. Talking about a solid 5-minute drive here and just running the hell out of the ball with Martin Jr., getting Reynolds some more work in before ultimately having Ryan Barker banging another field goal for them. By comparison, even with what looked like a strong kickoff return for Clemson, the defense just started to tighten everything up. And even though you would have Randall pick up a 5-yard gain, which was solid, the passes literally had one of the Penn State defenders creep up and tackle TJ Moore Jr. right at the line. And then you would also have them completely drape Betancourt on this route to force the incompletion and punt again on Clemson's part. All it took was one play to space this thing out. It had been a slow pace throughout the entire game, to say the least. But man, Trebor Pena, again, the most consistent Penn State wide receiver this season. And, you know, yes, he was a transfer from Syracuse. Yes, he's a redshirt senior. So I guess that's to be expected a little bit. But still, it's helped them immensely in ways they couldn't have imagined. And as far as this game goes, he would single-handedly break it wide open by taking this route. I mean, he's going over the middle of the field, and, you know, he hauls it in. There's a defender over him. He breaks the tackle off, and then just proceeds to turn up the fucking nitrous, and get himself all the way into the end zone for what would go down as a 73-yard touchdown catch. Now, they failed a 2-point conversion, but still, they had the advantage. They were up by 12 at that point. So, you know, any bit of momentum you could take, you were more than fine with it at that point. And if the defense could capitalize off of that, well, hell, man, you were smooth sailing for the rest of this game. But Clemson at least had one last gasp of hope produced here as they would continue to go for it on crucial downs, including picking up this one with Sapp on 4th and 2 to extend the drive and ultimately have Adam Randall get himself in the end zone for a very short yard rushing touchdown, which is where he's been most effective, ironically enough. Still, even with them at least finding, the scoring contribution there from Randall's part, Clemson themselves, ironically, just could not get off the field by this point and proceeded to give up just a ton of other plays here between more strong running from Martin Jr. and then also a deep bomb down the field to Ross, one of their speed guys, for a 35-yard gain. Ultimately, their backup running back would come in, change the pace up, and get himself a gain. And at that point, they were running with tempo. At this point, I knew the game was over. Because the Nittany Lions, hustle back to the line of scrimmage. Hustle their asses off, knowing they just made the play they just made. And they catch Clemson completely off guard, because nobody on that side of the field is completely set in understanding of what they were supposed to be covering. And as a result, Bachmeier just gets the freest seam route over to Rappleyea for an 11-yard touchdown catch, with nobody covering him at all. The backers are completely lost. They're all the way near the line of scrimmage, not even worrying about the dude. He just runs this route essentially untouched. I mean, you have a safety over the top, and that's kind of how it was as well with some of those tight window throws. Like, the safety was trying to help. He was there a little bit. But as soon as Bachmeier saw him off that release, the timing was perfect. There was no doubt about Rappleyea being able to secure that catch. And ultimately, it would give Penn State the 22-10 lead, which is where we would stand with the score as the Nittany Lions would win 22-10 in Yankee Stadium. With some snow in the background, I guess, but it was, pushed to the side because, again, the dynamics of some of these baseball fields hosting bowl games and NFL games, dimensions can get a little freaky, but I guess they had extra room to, the very side to just push all the snow there. Fair enough. I will say, though, man, there's actually some solid work by Penn State. You got to give them that. And, man, the interim coach was emotional as hell about it. I mean, if you'd been following the whole thing, the man himself is literally an alum of PSU and was called up on short notice, essentially, to have to take over for this team after the firing, where you could have found it easy to see so many different players, especially the captains of the team, feel a little bit demoralized at the fact that Franklin had gotten fired. Yet, even though they went through that slump still, they were able to close out the season strong. And he couldn't be any happier in that moment, genuinely speaking. So you love to see those things. As for the numbers here, Ethan Bachmeier had 262 passing yards on 67.6% completion and 2 touchdown passes. A strong outing by him, but, he is a guy who, as a true freshman, is still going to have room to grow and is going to have to take those next steps forward eventually. There were definitely times over the course of the entire season where you could look at him and you could say, okay, that's definitely a freshman. But, with time, and if they have enough trust in him, because at this point, Penn State is going to contemplate a lot of things. We aren't that far away from the transfer portal window opening up. Maybe they do consider potentially going after one of these other quarterbacks, especially from the FCS. Trying to take the Chambliss route, right? They could potentially look in that area and get themselves another quarterback if they don't have enough faith in Bachmeier. But I think this was a solid exhibition by him regardless. And maybe you have something there if you give him a chance. But that'll remain to be seen. As for Martin Jr., the freshman running back here for the Nittany Lions, he had 20 rushes for 101 yards. And, it wasn't bad on his end at all. I don't even think he'd gotten any reps this season. I'm not sure. I haven't been watching that much Penn State football. Maybe he, at the very least, could have gotten some opportunities in other games. But from what I know, this was his very first action of the year. And man, he made the most of it to set the tone for a team that would have 138 yards on the ground combined. It was gritty. They had to work for the yards. They only averaged 3.5 yards a pop as a team. But he set the tone. And, you know, to lose a duo of running backs who you could argue could be the number one running back on a lot of other teams in the FBS, that could be a huge loss. But maybe, just maybe, they can fill that immediately with him. Who knows? Trevor Pena had 5 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown. Ross had 8 receptions for 84 yards. And Howard had 2 receptions for 34 yards. As for the Tigers, K. Klubnik had 193 passing yards on 56.4% completion. Yikes, bro. Just yikes. As a team, yes, including sack yardage as well, the Tigers ran 443 yards on just 25 carries and 1.7 yards carry. Like, that's atrocious. That's atrocious, man. There's almost no way you could realistically compete with that in any other game. Yet, you got the defensive contributions you needed for a while. And with that kind of ineptitude, you literally couldn't get out of your own side of the field sometimes. And at that point, when you have to be out as a defense that consistently and trying to defend, trying to hold on, trying to get it back for your offense, at some point you're just going to crumble. And that's what I would attribute that up to. Because there's no way. Like, they handled their business for the most part. It wasn't a complete and total domination. I mean, we can't sit here and act like that. But ultimately, man, you're asking them to spend that much time on the field and you can't even manage to get some kinds of plays going enough in opponent territory, or even convert off those drives consistently enough to at least limit the damage, limit the margin of victory here to get yourself in a spot where you have a chance to win it. You don't even do either of those things throughout the course of the game. It's ridiculous. TJ Moore Jr. showed some promise, though, at least. The true freshman would finish with 6 receptions for 83 yards, and Brown, out of the backfield, would have 3 receptions for 31 yards, while Benton had 2 receptions for 29 yards. Also, on defense, a different player by the name of Sammy Brown had himself 13 tackles and 3 solo tackles. So that's pretty impressive. And the Penn State defense as a whole combined for 4 sacks and 6 TFLs, with Dennis Sutton, of course, leading the way. They are definitely going to miss him, but again, as a proven talent, potentially, as a highly touted prospect, potentially, he more than likely will also enter his name in the NFL draft fairly soon. So you got to move on from some point. All right, moving on to number 22 Georgia Tech versus number 12 BYU in the chaos that was the Pop-Tarts Bowl on Saturday. Man, just quick note about that, because it's not necessarily something that I'm focused on, but I mean, hell, a lot of this stuff is sponsored by different companies and promoted by different brands with their names being tacked on it and everything. So it's only right that you would continue to have all of the madness that is associated with the Pop-Tarts company and how they operate in this bowl season to be a part of this game. Between having them literally, as the game waned on, just having a lot of different shit going on with these damn Pop-Tarts, grilling them, play fighting with them, having a ton gather around, just do random stuff, interacting with the fans, having random shit happen after scores, and trying to get TV placement, doing those things and everything. It was fucking chaotic to the point where even when, one of these teams ends up getting the victory, you have them getting doused in fucking Pop-Tarts bites out of a fucking cooler. That's how crazy this is. But you have to love that madness as a part of bowl season. And I mean, as for the game itself, it just added even more onto that already, because the on-field product was actually really interesting, intriguing, and it came down to the fucking wire between two of the teams that love to do similar things. They've got strong wide receiver cores, of course. That's understandable between, Malik Rutherford on that side, and they had Eric Singleton Jr. before he transferred from Georgia Tech to Auburn. Then, you have Chase Roberts and Parker Kingston, of course, for BYU getting the job done there. But it is all about the running game for them. At the end of the day, they can try to throw a number of different things at you. It's all going to come back to toting that ball up the gut of a fucking defense and moving grown men out of the way to fight as much as they can for yardage. That's how this thing goes. And you get that in ways. Although BYU, at the time that I got into the game, they ended up picking up a first down with the contributions from Carson Ryan, who would have himself a hell of a game to close out his college career with the team. But it would start out with him picking up a 14-yard gain to move the chains there. And they would then resort to running with, backup running backs, because they had LJ Martin out. It might have been a health thing. He might have just been choosing to sit out. I'm not sure. But they had guys like Hillstead and Nawahine come in and try to take the load off. You still got situations where Bachmeier would try to run the football, and he did so on the second down, only when he got up, it looked as though he might have tweaked something. They referenced and kept referencing throughout the game that he had suffered a sort of ankle tweak or injury in the game against Texas Tech when he was last playing. And I don't know, on this run, he's going outside, and he's usually going to be upright in those situations, or at least trying his hardest with his frame to stay on his feet, keep the legs churning, and move forward. That's how he's typically run all season long. So it was unexplainable to see him slip to the ground just on command like that. It was strange. And it kept them short of the line. Ultimately, they would be forced to go for it in a goal-to-go situation. But you have to credit Georgia Tech here, because they would hold the fuck up with effort. This damn real linebacker built ass motherfucker, bro, literally has the fucking back plate sticking out around his neck and protruding from it all the way up here. That's how you know he's a fucking linebacker. He would get right in there, right in the gap, and stuff Nawahine right at the line for no gain to give Georgia Tech the ball back. But it's smart whenever you do this, because you give as little space as possible to an offense in that situation. And with Georgia Tech recognizing this, they got a good start with Malachi Husley running for a 7-yard gain up the middle of the field. But ultimately, they themselves would be forced to punt on an instant 3-and-out. So not much going there. BYU, even with that goal line stand, said, you know what, we can get right back down the field in a way quicker period of time and get it done. It would literally be the Parker Kingston show and the Chase Roberts show. Getting them both down the field at those times, and ultimately having Roberts do work in the end zone for a 7-yard touchdown catch. This shit was just way too easy. For one, they decided for some reason that, you know what, it was a good idea knowing that Parker Kingston is a versatile guy, but he does a lot of his damage in the slot, between getting those fade routes, between getting these double passes in, between getting these sweeps and eating off of those shits. They thought it was a good idea to put a safety on Parker Kingston. And that promptly ended up happening. Then you had Roberts just streak wide open into the end zone from 7 yards out for a touchdown catch to give them the early 7-0 lead here. But Georgia Tech, man, they had something up their sleeve. I tell you, they mentioned at several points how Brent Key referenced that, one, there could be a little bit of sentiments involved with the fact that this would be Haynes King's last game as a college player with the team, and he'd want to make the most of it there. They touched into that point several times. But they also stated how he told a reporter that, hey, we have trick plays up our sleeves. BYU does too, so that would add yet another layer to this game. But I still couldn't have been prepared for what happened next. They progressed down the field very nicely, getting Malik Rutherford involved on multiple points for a combination of 41 overall yards to get into goal-to-goal territory, where unfortunately, with the laser-tight coverage, they would miss opportunities to get their wide receivers to football on several occasions here. It came down to a 4th and goal, and at that point, I'm thinking, okay, they're probably just going to kick the field goal, and I mean, hey, they're lined up in field goal range. It's safe to say that they essentially did the inverse of what Oregon will traditionally do at times. Because Oregon, they will fake like they're going to go for 2, and then if they aren't feeling it, I guess, they'll line back up in field goal formation. They did the absolute reverse, is they would attempt to kick the field goal, but then some kind of audible, some kind of on-the-fly thing, because the team isn't expecting it, they just all merge right back in to a standard formation with the running back, essentially taking a sort of direct snap, if you will, and getting himself a touchdown run. The shit was chaotic as hell, but it got Georgia Tech on the board. It tied up that ball game, and that's how we knew instantly that we were going to be in for one. Carson Ryan continued his work on the day, but at that point, with this game, it literally felt like no one was guarding him. Like, he got the shortest flat route imaginable without any player even wanting to watch him. And at that point, he was able to just run free up the field for what would turn into a 35-yard gain and get them on Georgia Tech's side of the field instantly. Then you had guys like Nawahine and Delaney rush for a few times here before picking up an actual first down with several guys, including Phillips and Carson Ryan once again. And it came time for them to run the football, though. That goal line stand would hold even stronger. And this was going to be the theme of the game, especially early on for BYU. Like, they were getting the drives that they needed to move the ball down the field, and you kept coming up short in the red zone time and time again. Although they got themselves off to a bad start once they decided, you know what, we're going to give Parker Kingston a short sweep in this situation. At least Georgia Tech actually decided to watch film, because BYU, every game, you can pencil Parker Kingston to get at least one rushing opportunity off of those sweep plays alone. Have to watch it at every point. There's almost no way. It's a reasonable aspect of their offense. They don't always spam it, but they clearly love to try to get their man the ball. That's fairly simple to understand. Ultimately, they would be stopped short, and Will Ferrin would kick the field goal to give BYU the 10-7 lead. But it was going to be Haynes King's time to shine. Although it didn't help matters that Glasgow would actually get a great spy and contain on King on this option play to keep him very short of picking up any yardage whatsoever. And yet, all this grabbing shit of the face mask would proceed to give them an automatic first down. So that was tough. And your Yellow Jackets would make the most out of these opportunities. Although they would get themselves a situation where I don't know exactly how this ended up being pass interference. But it's like, hey, man. And granted, they had gotten away with one earlier in the drive, but I guess something compelled the refs to say, you know what, we're just going to hand you this one. We'll get him in there. Then it became time for Eric Rivers to get his work in. All this talk about Malik Rutherford is warranted as one of the core guys of that team. But Eric Rivers himself, they kept explaining it. His speed was something, and I guess the speed of the team overall was something that BYU might not have been prepared for. They're definitely a defense that is one of the best in the nation when they're on their A game, and they can bring the physicality. But it felt like Georgia Tech had their most success when they used that physicality and worked it against their own favor. I mean, this man Rivers, bro, this touchdown catch literally sees him get the leverage, work his defender inside, and then run essentially a zig all the way to the outside, completely freezing this man and just walking into the end zone at that point. And it just when it couldn't get any worse for BYU, the fact that you had given up those contributions on defense and could not protect the football or effectively score in the red zone at times, got even worse when you consider that this kickoff return would be fatal in terms of having a fumble be forced by a Georgia Tech player and ultimately go for Georgia Tech possession here. I mean, they literally had the perfect pan to the camera, I guess, after it happened, with Jamal Haynes on the sideline just chilling with his helmet off, trying to talk with his boy, thinking, okay, we're going to be off for a little bit. Then once he sees the fumble, he's like, oh shit, all right, I got to run, I got to go get my helmet back on, I got to go out there and play, make something happen. Within just a mere matter of seconds, BYU went from having a 3-point lead to now being down by 11. It only took them the one play to get Byrne, one of their tight ends, in for a touchdown score to make this a 21-10 ball game. My thinking for BYU after a possession following that was that you got to find a way to control the ball for the rest of the half. It's as simple as that. You can't give Georgia Tech another possession here. You got to do whatever you can. Grind out as much clock as you possibly can to get a score on the board. Anything at that point, right? And they ended up failing to do so. They got a good start with Kingston getting a 19-yard gain, but outside of that, they would stall out and ultimately have Georgia Tech get another shot at it, where they would also come up just short of being able to get in field goal range. Still, it just gave them even more of an advantage, and it's like that's the last thing you wanted to do in that situation, especially with how BYU has struggled in these situations to come back in games where they've been down by more than 2 scores early on. Yet, even with an 11-point deficit here, BYU could say that they were still in the game. They just needed to clean up some of their stuff here. Georgia Tech was definitely rolling, and the sentiments were definitely high in that locker room. Maybe if you keep this going, you can send out some of your seniors on, their own paths the right way with a victory. If you're Georgia Tech thinking in this situation. Well, you'd get even more chaos before we even reach this point in the second half of the game. Now, Georgia Tech, they had the idea. They had a fair amount of balance in there, getting some smooth runs with the backfield Haynes. You feel me? However, after all of this, things were left a little bit to be desired. I mean, yes, Malachi Hosley would get himself in goal-to-go territory, and the team for that matter, after a 13-yard gain on third and intermediate. But once they got into a goal-to-go situation on 3rd and long, you figured that Georgia Tech was going to struggle getting into the end zone that way. You know, their offense is predicated on imposing that kind of physicality, and they were already behind the sticks to that extent. It wasn't going to be easy. To make things even worse, this backwards pass to one of the other players for Georgia Tech would turn disastrous, as at that point, the entire defense was swarming the man, and somebody came in, Talmo Pale, and ultimately forced the fumble, allowing Glasgow to get the ball back and give BYU a chance to steal some early momentum. Like, that was the first drive of the third quarter. And in that situation, if Georgia Tech had played things perfectly, they could have double-dipped. Instead, you come away with nothing at all. BYU has a chance to shorten this to a one-possession lead. Okay. Nope. Because they could not protect the ball in the end zone, in the red zone even. They couldn't. They just could not. Carson Ryan was still getting it done through the air. Don't get me wrong. And they lucked out when an interception was overturned because of the fact that there was defensive pass interference. And it was clear. It was clear, to say the least. So they made the right call there. But, man, still, it just felt like there was a lid on the entire thing once they got in this spot. I don't know what compelled Bachmeier to throw this. And again, he'd been playing well all season long. There's still a chance for him to grow as a player, as he's accomplished all this while being a true freshman in his own right. And you could see this on full display here. Like, I think Kingston was getting jammed out of bounds, and at that point, I mean, even if you call yourself trying to get him the football, it couldn't touch his hands first if he was trying to reestablish, because the defender would have to in that situation. And he gave the defender all the room to make a play on the football and ultimately force the interception to give the Yellow Jackets the ball right back without any sort of response in play whatsoever. Now, Georgia Tech, man, after that, it was looking scary for BYU's defense, because you didn't get a ton of explosive plays on this drive, but they were starting to grind out that fucking clock. They were starting to grind that shit out. It was looking bad. This would be a 6-minute and 1-second drive, and they got into the red zone of BYU pretty swiftly. Again, if they had managed to maximize on these opportunities, we could be talking about a completely different ball game here. But in a game that had already been marked by Georgia Tech forcing those mistakes, I guess the football gods decided, okay, we can have Aiden Burr, one of the more consistent kickers for the team and in the nation this season. We're going to have him miss a pretty easy field goal in his own right from 35 yards out to try and give them another chance to make something happen here. And what do you know, after that block kick from the BYU special teams against Burr, some got activated in the Cougars because they decided to just drive all the way down the field themselves, with Demooney getting multiple 10-plus yard runs to set the tone of the drive, and then ultimately having Nawahine with just some pretty good strength here, bolstering his way in for a 2-yard touchdown run, and also getting the 2-point conversion to make this a 3-point ball game in the event that they needed to settle for a field goal. Both defenses were unrelenting for this stretch, as they would force essentially 3 straight 3-and-outs between each other before it all came down to BYU with a chance to, respond with the game on the line. They could take the lead to win, they could tie it up to send it to overtime if they needed to, but they needed something substantial in this drive. And they would work their way down the field with Bachmeier leading the way. Ultimately, man, even though it wasn't made easy, they thugged it the fuck out. They thugged it out. Carson Ryan would once again find himself at the center of a crucial catch before having DeMooney bully his way through the gap of the defense for a 4-yard touchdown run to follow up Haynes' efforts and give the Cougars, who would then proceed to kick the PAT, a 4-point lead at essentially the 2-minute warning. And that was going to be kind of tough for the Georgia Tech squad to navigate. But at that point, it looked like it was going to be all, and I mean all, against them. I think that they had multiple timeouts at their disposal, but bruh, man, they were literally backed into a corner watching this thing. They were truly backed into a fucking corner. Everything to start out this drive that could have gone wrong went fucking wrong for Georgia Tech. Between just having some absolute misfires from Haynes King take place, then not to mention on the play before what would be a 3rd and 15, they got into that situation because of a mishandled snap on Haynes King's part. Then you proceeded to have a situation with about a minute left, and it's literally 4th and 15 on their own side of the field. The game should have been over right then, right there. And yet, in what could be considered a pseudo Hail Mary, you have Haynes King dropping back, looking for something at that point. Something. Anything to go his way and give this team new life. And then you see him chuck the ball up deep down the field, essentially at the bottom of the screen, and you see this motherfucker Eric Rivers literally streaking all the way past their corner in Evan Johnson for what would then be a 66-yard gain down the field. He was trying to haul ass. He was trying to gain that in that moment, but Johnson just got enough of the jersey and enough of the player to force the stop right then, right there. But all of a sudden, things were different. 2 timeouts. You now have a potential go-to-go situation in play here. You're in the red zone already. That changes things completely. We had 35 seconds at that point. And, man, if they could have found a way at that point to make any sort of progress in terms of moving up the field on this drive, you could look at this game completely different and say that Georgia Tech probably could have come away with this. Just because of how they like to run their offense. They would have gotten any closer. I guarantee you the game plan was going to look different. But BYU, in this case, they wanted to play back, not let anything get behind them. And they wanted to watch out for Haynes King's legs, while also being sure to pressure his ass as much as they possibly could. Because he does not perform the best under pressure. He's okay and was somewhat fine in this game. But he ain't consistent enough from there for a defense to be scared off of doing that. So they went for it anyways. First down. Just a complete misfire here once again. But no problem. You still got 28 seconds left. It's only second down. Okay. Another whiff. Both of them to Jamal Haynes in that situation. And both of them, on BYU's end, they were willing to give that up regardless. As long as it's not a deeper shot, you'll be okay. Okay, Georgia Tech has a chance to reset. You get into third down, and this one was brutal. Because Patterson looks like he's on the shorter end, and he damn near got up for this. But it went right through his hands, essentially in the end zone. Like, that would have been it. That would have been the game right then, right there, if he would have gotten his hands fully on it. And it slipped right through. But you still have to figure out a way to get something to happen on fourth down. Something, anything. Whether it's to keep the drive alive, whether it's to take a shot into the end zone. Just find a way to continue this thing. Evan Johnson would get himself his instant revenge and redemption here by picking off a Haynes King pass in the end zone and ultimately getting the Cougars the 25-21 win while sending Georgia Tech key specifically and Haynes King off on a pretty low note this season, especially considering the way that they started. I will note that about this team. I mean, bruh, 8-0 start. Primed, potentially, to make the CFP if they just continued that momentum. And they crumbled completely, dropping what would go on to be 4 of their last 5 games here. All while BYU was able to celebrate the whole time waiting on having these large-ass edible Pop-Tarts be toasted for them. And engaging in them with Sataki and everyone else, just making all these allusions to different Pop-Tarts. Literally, as soon as they come out, the man literally takes his hand, tries to chop it off like this, without even giving a fuck, and just proceeds to scarf down a fistful of crumbled up Pop-Tarts. They had cookies and cream, I think, and fucking strawberry. Dude, it just stuffed himself full. I mean, you could not make that shit up. But again, that is the essence of the Pop-Tarts Bowl at the end of the day, I suppose. Like, fuck it, man. For BYU, Bachmeier would have 325 passing yards, touchdown pass, and an interception on 71.1% completion. The running backs combined for themselves 17 touches in the backfield and also 80 total yards and a touchdown each. DeMooney had the better game with 48 yards on the ground on 6.9 yards a pop. Much more effective. But either way, both of them contributed rather differently, but did what they needed to do to get the win ultimately. Carson Ryan would have 8 receptions for 120 yards. Parker Kingston would have 5 receptions for 76 yards. Chase Roberts would have 7 receptions for 57 yards. And Phillips would have 4 receptions for 53 yards. Man, as for Georgia Tech, Haynes King would have 270 yards and 2 touchdowns along with an interception on 55% completion. Damn. The one thing you can say is that, I mean, Georgia Tech had this in the bag. Literally, you got to look back to that situation near halftime. You can't play the coulda, woulda, shoulda game. But the idea literally should have been, and I think they were thinking it, right? The plan should have been to double dip. And they had their chance to convert on doing that and failed to do so. Completely a missed opportunity on their front, especially with them being able to turn over BYU like that so early on and keep them out of the end zone even when they would get down the field into their side of the territory. So that was a missed opportunity. But also, looking at the distribution and seeing that Georgia Tech was able to run for 131 yards and 4.7 yards a pop, it just looks so weird to see Haynes King, who is by nature a sort of dual threat quarterback, probably leans more towards the run. Why is he only running the ball 7 times in what is going to be his final career game as a college player regardless? That's something that they may regret. Because I don't know who in their right mind would trust Haynes King to throw the ball 40 times in a single game. But also, with what he's shown you throughout the course of the entire season and ever since he's been at Georgia Tech, like, bruh, he can surely take a team, a coach, putting it all on his shoulders and asking him to go out and contribute in that way. He's handled that more often than not. So you'd think in a situation like this, with no other game being played after this, for the rest of this season. And with Haynes King departing, you'd want to give him his best chance, his best shot at winning you this ball game and dictating the control of this one. And those things coincide with him running the ball well and running the ball with volume. And you only give him the ball 7 times. I would question that. But I guess as he was doing this damage through the air, Malik Rutherford would have 8 receptions for 105 yards, and Eric Rivers would have 4 receptions for 102 yards and a touchdown. So they can both say, hey, they got fed in this one. That's just, I don't know. Like, you'd probably trust Haynes King just a smidge more in that situation. I would personally say. But, 'tis what it is now. And, I mean, I guess Haynes King could decide to do anything he wants, but he would probably be moving on in that situation as well to at least enter his name in the draft. I don't know. I can't project as to where he'd get drafted, but it would be stacked up against him a little bit. I mean, if he had one of the craziest, like, Heisman-style seasons in the world and managed to, potentially be playing some extra ball right now, maybe he'd be a bit more highly considered, but, they're going to look at the fact that he's a 7th-year player. He's going to turn 25, literally to start out the new year in a matter of days. And, yes, we saw Tyler Shuck manage to rise all the way up the ranks because of work in the combine. The same thing could happen with Haynes King, but I don't know. I don't know if I like his chances to get drafted super, super, super high. I mean, hell, we got a ton of other developments here, and even though I'm not, one of them, again, though it's big, and though it's clearly something that's been heard around the world at this point, it ties directly into the Moore situation. So I'm not covering that here. However, there's been something else brewing with Diego Pavia that I've heard about and has been alluded to also across several different sources and things like that, even without looking fully into it. It's been mentioned that he's trying to sue for another year of eligibility. And all I would say about that is this. This was the same thing that was going on last offseason. And his ass was lucky to get another year of eligibility before what would go on to be a Heisman finalist worthy season from him. Then he went out of his way to say, he's going to sue the voters or sue the entire organization for, I guess, what he thought was just a rigged practice. I mean, he said as much when he went after, these voters and, crapped on the result while also trying to say, hey, okay, I'm going to celebrate Mendoza in person regardless, but not keep that same energy elsewhere. I don't know about that. Like, that's strange. So you have all that going on, and now you have the nerve to try to go back and say, okay, I want another year of eligibility. It's like, bruh, you gotta leave college at some point. That is essentially what I'm going to say about that. It's not a major one, because you have to think about it from this perspective. Like, even if the NFL, and I mean, hell, if people want to say that that's a shot from McAfee when he said this, then sure, do what you will with it, but he's not wrong in that, with Pavia having that kind of build as a 5'9" quarterback, chances in the NFL for him might be very limited at this point. That's a reality for some players. You're not going to have all these star players going off in college and proceeding to do the same thing in the pros. There's only a small percentage that truly make it. And, again, that's not the aspiration for everybody. It's probably clear that Pavia wants to extend his playing career. You got to move forward somehow. Even if you go to the UFL and then enter your way into the NFL. I mean, that's a pathway now that spring football is somewhat back. as an establishment. But you have to move forward. Because the most telling thing about this is that all of this shit that you are doing will actively hurt the incoming class for Vanderbilt. Even though, yes, you've done so much good work with them over the past couple seasons, you've literally led them to their most successful season. And they can't not take that away from Diego Pavia, no matter what you want to say about his character following all of these different things. However, as I literally talked about, and again, we can talk about how morally correct it was for that information to be leaked before it had to be confirmed by the person themselves and by the schools. Jarrett Curtis literally is the number 2 quarterback in this class across the nation. And he went out of his way to decide, you know what, I'm going to flip from Georgia and I'm going to come to Vanderbilt and represent this school. Projecting to be a pocket passer, but still, that's tremendous work. That is a highly touted recruit deciding to come to your program over a more established one in just the past 5 years in Georgia with what they've been able to do in terms of pumping out recruit after highly touted defender entering the NFL. Not to mention the championships that they've won. That is a pipeline to instant success if Jarrett Curtis decided to go there, and he chose you, Vanderbilt. Anyways, after being a laughingstock for so much time, that offers so much legitimacy to your program, and you'd be indebted to at least give him an early chance if you don't have other guys on this roster trying to work their way there, which doesn't appear to be the case with Vanderbilt right now. So you're hurting Curtis's chances if Pavia decides to come back. Maybe he does need a year to, sit back and learn some things, but also, you don't just leave that to the wayside, especially with the volatility of college football as it is between NIL and the transfer portal. It wouldn't take much for Curtis in this situation to have that loyalty be tested, get discontent with the situation, and then say, you know what, I'm going to move on if you're going to continue to choose Pavia over me. So again, yeah, Pavia's been a great player for this team. And I mean, yeah, you can't always stop a dude from playing. But for as much as I know, the man has already filled out and has already overstayed his welcome. He was truly lucky. They were generous in giving him another year of eligibility last offseason. We saw what he did with that. But now it's done, bro. Just move forward. Vanderbilt is clearly trying to as well. And, it's been a good story. But in order for them to continue writing it, they've got to be able to find different talent elsewhere. It cannot just be about you. You have to think about the whole of the team. It cannot just be about you. It is as simple as that. And I mean, hell, with the job that Clark Lay has done with the team, as long as he's there, over this next 6 years as the contract states, bro, they're going to be okay. They're always going to be in the conversation as long as they recruit right. And what do you know? They got a jump start to that with a highly talented quarterback out of this recruiting class. But again, with what we've seen from Pavia, can we definitively say that he's going to take that into consideration? I don't know if I can say that for sure, to be honest with you. It's quite an unfortunate situation to be in. For a couple other developments here, I guess more rapid fire, but you would have a couple former players in college football become head coaches of UFL teams. Anthony Becht as I was looking at, was hired by one of the UFL teams. I believe it was the Orlando, what is it, Storm in the UFL, if I'm not mistaken? Yeah, the Orlando Storm in the UFL. And he moved from, I guess, St. Louis in that situation. So that's credit to him. Originally, again, I was just looking at it. I was seeing that, hey, okay, he was hired by a Florida school, maybe? No. The team is just spaced in Florida, simply put. And I mean, hell, I guess we aren't that far removed from UFL play. So, I mean, we will see how that goes for sure. But it wasn't just him, as you had the former Ohio State man and Ted Ginn Jr. also get hired recently, per Pete Thamel and ESPN and other sources, by the Columbus. What's the Columbus team? Just see that real quick. But yes, he was hired by their organization in the UFL. Yes, the Columbus Aviators. Dear goodness. Got a lot of creative names here. It is what it is. But the connection alone is going to make that intriguing for sure. They knew what they were doing with that. So, there go a couple of moves there. And also, for DeSean Jackson, the now Delaware State head coach, he had recently, per Pete Thamel, inked an extension with Delaware State that'll keep him there until 2028. And I was looking at it a little bit, and also just thinking, because for the first couple of weeks, you had just weird stuff going on in terms of just, I don't know, like, the teams were somewhat competitive, but they were coming up short. It wasn't just Delaware State and DeSean Jackson. You also had the same thing going on with Michael Vick and Norfolk State. And it's like, at that moment, okay, things could go incredibly bad for both of these programs if they don't find a way to turn it around very soon. And I mean, hell, both of them proceeded to do it, especially louder for DeSean Jackson's case. As this article essentially covering HBCU sports looked at here, you know, they stated that Delaware State, even with that rough start, they finished 8-4, and they had a 4-1 record in MEAC conference play, while also making the MEAC championship game for the first time in nearly 20 years, and having their first winning season since 2012. Now, you know, extending a coach like that so early in your first successful season in that much time could be considered jumping the gun, and it could be considered, you know, as a fluke. So that will have to be proven naturally. But for them to make it, I mean, they've got to have a lot of faith in Jackson to want to keep him there for the next 4 years after just regaining that kind of success. It should be very exciting to see how he progresses as a coach, for one, without really having much experience at all. Like, he was not a guy who was in coaching circles before entering as one with this program. And I mean, hey, you got to credit him, you got to credit the whole staff at that point. Because it's a mutual relationship. You're actively trying to lead the entire roster, and you're trying to pass on different knowledge to them as a former player, but you're also trying to take in different information and learn different things on the fly in what is your first head coaching spot as a just ever in his life. And to have that, like, that's definitely something you have to respect overall. So we'll definitely see how it goes. I mean, hell, you're seeing the same thing essentially, and yes, there's a bit of chaos going on with that. I have to get back to covering basketball consistently. There's a lot I have to talk about there, and I'd have to probably be as brief with it as possible. But essentially, J.J. Redick was the same way. Never had any coaching experience whatsoever proceeded to do that with the Lakers last season, and they instantly gave him an extension. And it's going okay. They have a great record, but J.J. Redick is, things are getting a little rocky there. So, if you don't have those kinds of things happen at Delaware State for DeSean Jackson, then it's probably going to be okay, I would think. But, that'll do it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.